let's make a start with the session. So it's really lovely to see people joining live, and I know that there's quite a lot of people who will be catching up with the recording later. So just a quick reminder that you will obviously, everyone receives the recording, even if you're attending live, and the handout will be sent out alongside the recording as well. So welcome to session 3 of our vocal health toolkit, and that's vocal health for amateur choirs and their conductors with Joanna Tomlinson. So we're delighted to have Jo back with us. She did some sessions most recently at Autumn Convention and also ran a session on vocal changes for women in their teens as part of our Leading Singing Secondary School session. So it's brilliant to have her back with us. She's a conductor, a vocal coach, and I'm sure we're going to learn a huge amount from her over the next hour and a half. Just a quick point about questions. We are going to allow some time at the end for questions, so please do feel free to be thinking about those. But also, if there's anything as we go through, you can add it to the chat as we're talking, and we'll come back to it later. So if you think I'm going to forget that if I don't say it right now, please feel free to add it to the chat, and I'll be monitoring that and looking back at it later. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you straight over to Jo.
Hello everyone, it's really lovely to see some people here on screen, and I know there's quite a number of you out there watching back afterwards, so big welcome to you all. It would be really nice just to know in the chat, those of you that are on the call, whether you're here as a singer or as a conductor of amateur choirs. I suspect we'll have a bit of both watching back, and I'm hoping even the sections of today that are more focused on conducting gesture might be of interest to singers that don't do any conducting, but just to get a bit of insight into why what your conductor does affects your sound. So if you want to share in the chat anything about you and why you're here, or if you are a conductor, please do so. It'd be nice to hear and maybe slant things in a different direction if we want to. So so someone conducting a community choir, upper voices, that's lovely. I don't know how many we'll have from choirs. Perhaps they won't spot what we're up to as much as all the conductors, but hopefully this will all feed back into our choirs that we work with. I think I'm going to share my screen straight away. So please shout about whether you can see my slide. Great, excellent, coming up. And it's funny because you get the people's faces in the way. I'm going to move you all out of my way so I can see what I've put on here. We're going to start, we've got a few different sections. I thought it would be quite interesting, rather than just talking about your voice, to really get into some different areas of vocal health. So starting with the obvious things, with what you can do to help yourself on a daily basis to look after your voice, and then what we can do ourselves if we have a problem. Then we'll go into a bit more detail about if we've got a problem and we can't solve it ourselves, where to go for help and what that sort of situation might look like. And then we'll have a think about how our own vocal technique affects our voices, and the way we sing can help us to protect our voices, or those of the singers we work with. And finally, we'll be looking at some gesture issues and some things to do with our gesture to help our singers to sing more freely and with really healthy voices. So look, here comes the obvious stuff that some of you will just know already. Looking after ourselves physically is not just good for life, but really good for us as singers and those of us that are using our voices as our job, because we are conductors of choirs. So just look after yourself in all the ways you know we should, and we maybe don't always. So eating healthily, eating regularly, mixing up vegetables and plenty of protein in our diets, all those sorts of things, and gentle exercise on a regular basis. All those things will help us to keep in our voices in good condition, as well as our whole bodies. We always think about drinking water as a singer, keeping hydrated, and that really does mean starting early in the day. So getting some water in us before we do anything else. I mentioned it on the next slide. But it can take hours. I always try and remind my singers when I've got a concert day to start the day really well by drinking in the morning, rather than just, oh, I'm feeling a bit tired during the rehearsal process, and starting to drink then. We know this, don't we? But try not to go too mad with caffeine and alcohol. They can be drying for us. And also, of course, if we're drinking alcohol, we can perhaps lose our inhibitions a little bit and shout and use our voice a little bit less well than we might. On the same line, fizzy drinks, everything in moderation, but some people drink a lot of fizzy drinks, and that can be one of the things, along with certain foods, that can cause some acid reflux that can affect the voice. That's often something that can be a longer term thing, so it won't be just you've had a cold and your voice feels tired and sore afterwards. It can be something that you can't quite explain why your voice is not doing what you are hoping for it to do. It might feel hoarse. So just watching out for too much of that side of things. It's such an obvious one about smoking environments. Gosh, this is so different for us now. Many years after a smoking ban, when I was a teenager and in my 20s, I think you just were in smoky environments much more as part of life, and it's easier to avoid now. Taking care of your own voice just on a day-to-day basis. I noticed both of my choirs have expanded, my London choirs have expanded recently, and I just noticed in the break this week that everyone talking was really loud in the space, and I thought, do I say something about this? I've noticed it in on residential courses in dining halls and things, and I'm always shushing everyone in that sort of situation. But it really can build and build. And my choirs will go to the pub after choir rehearsals. I really must get better. I haven't put this in here. I must add this in. Finding a moment in your rehearsal to do a cool down at the end. I must be better at remembering to do that, because if they do all go to the pub and use their voices getting louder and louder, and they've sung and everything is stretched, be a really good idea. I'll add that in before I send these slides around, Rachel and Elizabeth. Just taking care of your own voice, and I've put here, be naggy with your chair of your choir and say, I really do need a microphone. If you think that you're having to push your own voice in rehearsals, I really try not to push. And if I do have to really project, I have to really make myself think about using the breath to project the voice, perhaps using the resonance, varying the height of my voice and projecting a little bit more, and to do so safely. But yeah, thinking about the way you produce a voice and your airflow when you are in rehearsal. I really like having a microphone for my bigger choirs, though. It just takes that pressure off. Alignment, we'll talk quite a bit about this because it relates to vocal technique, but also our conducting technique and what our singers reflect of what they see of us. And if you have any issues with your alignment, or just think it would be a good thing to check in with, I've mentioned Pilates, yoga, Feldenkrais as things that you could try for your own exercise. I love my Pilates classes. I have to say I do that, and I'm not great at doing loads of running about, but something I find not only relaxing but a little bit physical. I incorporate loads of that sort of thing into my warm-ups for my choirs, and I find I've gone back to Pilates recently, and I thought, I nicked loads of these ideas for my warm-ups when I last did Pilates. So nice to incorporate some of those things to do with alignment into your vocal training practice. Another obvious one, but try and stay healthy, look after yourself in terms of hand washing when you're out on the tube, try not to touch things and wash hands. And I take loads of vitamins and that sort of thing. So just extra care. Having a 4-year-old in nursery doesn't help that sort of thing, I find. But anyway, as much as you can, looking after yourself. And we often, when we do get a little bit of a sore throat or something, we start doing this sort of sound to clear the throat. It's best to try and avoid that. It can irritate things for you. So try, if you feel like you want to clear your throat, try taking a sip of water instead of doing that. So what happens if we do have a vocal problem? Perhaps we are feeling our voice is a bit husky, a bit tired, a bit breathier than normal, a bit dry in your throat. Perhaps you really have lost your voice and you really can't make any proper sound, or perhaps your voice has disappeared in part of your range. What do we need to do in that situation? If it's related to having been ill, unwell, having cold or flu or something like that, you really know this, but as much as you can to rest. And sometimes you've just got to think, yeah, I just have to get a depth from my rehearsal in the next few days, take it easy, rest as much as you possibly can. Sleep, resting your voice are always going to be the best things to help you get better. And just that awareness of how you use your voice, perhaps if you have to take a rehearsal, taking it in a slightly different way, perhaps speaking less, singing, demonstrating less, see how you can minimize demonstration, using the piano more, using your accompanist if you've got one. Even for fun, get one of your choir members to lead a warm-up or something like that, so you can adapt your rehearsal in that situation. Again, see if you can get hold of a microphone for that week, or some kind of projection for your voice. But if your voice, you really are finding it's not working, or it hurts to make sound, you really are best off not taking that rehearsal if you possibly can. Avoid taking it, because you are going to do more damage that way. And I find if you lose your voice, you really should be resting it until it comes back. And then, when it's starting to come back, just some very gentle sirening sounds, just to see if things are working and the vocal folds are meeting a bit more efficiently again. But always better to not start too soon. Hydration we've mentioned, and just doing that extra hydration and things that to do. So hot drinks, hot water with lemon, honey and lemon are really nice. Still keeping those caffeinated drinks to what you absolutely need to have in the day to keep you sane. A humidifier in your space. Some of you might have particularly dry places where you are at home. That might be something to consider. But certainly when you're under the weather, inhaling steam can help just to reduce that swelling. So yes, hot shower. I've got one of those little pots that you've just got a little thing to breathe into over the top. You can buy them very cheaply. Or just a simple bowl of water, or sink with boiling water in and a towel over your head. I'd recommend not actually adding extra stuff into it, because it can irritate. Just plain steam, breathing in through your nose, through your mouth, as often as you've got time for. Gargling with salt water is proven to help things with just taking away that inflammation as well. So some salt in boiling water, let it cool enough for you to be able to gargle with it. There's always this question about sucking throat sweets, and sort of debated, and it can make things soothed and feel a bit better, help you produce a bit of saliva. Generally, the advice is don't suck those medicated lozenges where you sort of can't feel your throat in the same way as normal. Just especially if you are going to be speaking on your voice, using your voice, singing or speaking, because you might just push or do damage where you don't need to. You mightn't realise that you're doing that if you're not numbing that pain. But anything you can do to suck is and drink and sip, all those things just to keep sort of producing saliva is absolutely fine. Whispering can actually be pretty unhelpful, so it's no good sort of saying, all right, so I'll come and do the rehearsal, but I'll whisper. So you can really feel that tension on the throat if you're not careful. And I've mentioned this again about reflux. If this is a bit of a specific thing, not to do with being unwell generally, but it's something that you might look at if that's diagnosed, that certain foods, fizzy drinks, time of day of eating, all those sorts of things, lying down too soon after eating can affect that. Now, what happens if you have been unwell, you have tried all those things, you've rested for a couple of weeks, things still aren't seeming to get any better at all, and there really hasn't been any change? Perhaps you sang on it and shouldn't have done, and things are starting to, you're worried that things aren't improving in your voice, you aren't able to use it in your usual way. Couple of main things, but I really would say get some medical help straight as soon. Your voice is your job if you're a conductor, and if you're an amateur singer, it's such an important and special part of your whole life. So don't let it go on and on for months, and go and see somebody about it. Usually, of course, first port of call is your GP, and they may have things to suggest or be able to suggest antibiotics if there's something needed for that. It's possible to also get yourself to a private ENT specialist as well. This sort of quicker look at things if you think something's been going on for a long time and you're not getting where you want to with your GP. I'm not going to go into every single possibility of illnesses and voice problems here, because you really should be seeing somebody, a GP or an ENT specialist, to look at things. But some of the possible things you might have had laryngitis, and that should be something that will get better within about a week. So things like that, and tonsillitis, of course, some of these things that affect the throat, the GP will give you antibiotics for. Sometimes, of course, if it's a virus, that won't have any effect whatsoever, so they'll be able to hopefully tell you that, and tell you just to rest if it's that. But sometimes it's not related to any of those things, and you may have to look more deeply at what the issue is if it's ongoing. So as I mentioned, there could be some medication for something like reflux. It could be a hormonal issue. There's some voice disorders that are treated with Botox. There's something to do with the vocal folds not vibrating freely, and for some reason. So that might be something that the ENT can look at, have a camera and have a look at and see what's going on. In more extreme situations, it's fairly rare, compared to just having being unwell and that sort of thing. But it may be that further down the line they discover that there's some kind of growth on your vocal folds, which is why it might not be working properly for you, and actually surgery might be needed. But that tends to be pretty last stage, and sometimes those things can get better themselves. So obviously medical support on all those things. And alongside that, often some speech therapy would happen. Hope that's all clear so far. Let's go into some vocal technique side of things. So how can we help ourselves in our rehearsals, in our singing practice, to sing freely and healthily without creating extra tension and kind of tiring our voices unnecessarily? We've mentioned alignment. I think it might be nice to stand up for a bit. Is everyone up for a bit of moving about? Stand and move my screen around. If you're up for standing up and joining me, do, or sitting well, we can work out how to sit well in rehearsals as well. So I'm standing up now. I'm just going to scan through my body from my feet. So I'm going to think about having the weight equally over my toes and my heels, just going back and forwards till I find that place, thinking about the outsides and the insides of my feet. Have I got a lovely point of balance, that all those 4 points feeling nicely balanced? Next, I'm going to move up to my knees. Are they soft? Now, I often think about my knees pointing forward. Sometimes that's more helpful than thinking about your toes pointing forwards. So we're all slightly built differently. So I'm thinking about my knees pointing forwards. I'm going to just grip my knees, so tighten them, overly tighten them, and then just undo them. That's a nice way of thinking about those loose knees rather than bent knees, just undone. Next, I'm going up and thinking about my tailbone. So if you can just go forward and back with your pelvis, and maybe you can do some circles or something like that in rehearsals as well to help free that up. And I'm just letting my tailbone drop. Whenever I start moving my hips around and doing circles, I find my knees start locking straight away. So just a revisit of those knees as well in that. Sometimes it's worth thinking about how far apart our legs are. You've often heard this, hip width apart. I find that if I'm thinking about my jeans pockets and a line straight down through the pockets, through my legs like tree trunks all the way down and into my feet, it's actually not quite as wide as you might think. That feels like a really nice, poised, balanced place. Here's me back to my Pilates. It's very similar to what I would do in a Pilates class. And then I like to think of a really nice big gap between my hips and my rib cage. So I'm really trying to separate them without kind of really rising up here, but just up the back in particular, feeling there's a gap. Sorry, move that down and see a bit more of me between here and here. So a lovely space in this part. And I often like to think about my alignment from my, maybe if I just come down, sitting down side on for you so you can see a bit better, a nice line up to the nape of my neck here, so that we're not here and we're not looking up like that, but the line is up the back and we can sort of feel like there's a little stretch up the back of the neck. I often actually go around and look around my choir and just check where you can imagine I've got a clip here in my hair, that isn't too far forwards, so it's just a little bit further back than you might think. You could also, in this posture that you're standing in, think about 4 lines, 3 going down and 1 going up. So you could think about lines down from your sternum here, so you're not actually raising too much there, and from your tailbone and in your elbows. It could be a nice way of thinking of it, rather than a shoulder drop, thinking of an elbow drop. And then the line going up is from the upper middle of your back. So that's the one that's helping separate your tailbone and your upper back. So all those things help us with this great alignment. This is so helpful for us as conductors that we will immediately get mirrored by our singers, and you can encourage your singers to stand in that very poised way, let's call it, so we're not stuck in that position. and it's not it's not a held position. You can hopefully move around within that, so you need to have a little bit of freedom of movement within that. But the places we often hold tension are around our shoulders and in the neck, which is obviously going to really affect our singing voices. So, I'm sure you'll all do these sorts of things with your singers in warm-ups. Just a little bit of a shoulder circle, go both ways. We can maybe get a bit more arm involved if we feel like it one week, and do a bit bigger circles. And again, whenever I do these things, I keep going back to, are my knees soft? Is my tailbone dropped when I've started to do these things? Sometimes I'll add two things together. So I'll do a hip circle at the same time as something to loosen up the tongue, like washing the front of my teeth with the tongue. Try that. This is going to start to free up the root of your tongue. We hold so much tension there at the root of the tongue. And if you do 20 circles in one direction and 20 in the other, I promise you by the end of that, I'm going to let you keep doing that as we're talking. And sometimes I get my choirs to have a little bit of sound, have a little conversation with each other while they're doing that, or chewing, just to free things up. I find once you've done about 20 in each direction, you really do feel it in the root of your tongue. It's quite tiring, but it really frees up your voice very quickly. It tells you that you are holding tension there. So lots of nice things with head and neck. Just be careful, obviously, of the head. People often say don't do big circles with your neck, but just a nice gentle stretch left and right. Hold it for long enough that it has an effect, or something very gently turning the angle as well. Jaw and tongue, look, these are the really major culprits of holding tension, so you might like to do some silly things with your choir, some stretching, and some those sorts of things. I often get my choirs to write their name with their tongue and really stretch it out, and lots of exercises to try and encourage the tongue to sit further forward and nice and relaxed in the mouth. So in terms of jaw position, on the whole for classical singing, we want quite a nice and narrow and long face, I think like an oval. And I find, we always have to encourage our singers not to go wide on an E vowel, getting that sort of over bright E. So you can still make a bright sound with the tongue position whilst keeping E nice and relaxed here. So all the time thinking about relaxation in the jaw. Sometimes I'll do exercises like getting choirs to just go blah 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 blah, using the tongue and jaw at the same time. And sometimes I like to use some other physical gesture to encourage something else. So I'll use a hand like this. This is my floppy jaw, and it's representing my jaw. Blah, blah, blah. To help my choir just blah, blah, blah. Really think about the freedom from here, and let it just really hang. What else could we try? Sometimes I find that if I go from an oo vowel, I get my jaw into a really nice position. So if you go ooh, then draw a circle, ooh, ah, and just let the chin drop, ooh, ah. Sometimes we swing the chin back too much as we change to ah. I'll show you that side on. You may not be able to hear me so well. Ooh, ah, or ooh, ah. So hopefully the first time you could see my chin just swinging back, and the second time I was trying to keep it on the same plane as the ooh, ooh, ah. So again, you can go around your choir, check their head positions. Are they coming forward like this? Is it just a lovely kind of line up from their back to the back of their head? And when they go into this ah position, ah, is their chin kind of pulling back? Ah. And it's more difficult to let your jaw relax, and especially as you go higher in the voice, you want that bit more freedom to allow the relaxation of the jaw in the upper range. So a really big thing to think about, the jaw. and the relaxation. It's going to affect voices so much if you're holding tension there. It's one of the things that I find affects the sound most in a choir. If people are not able to move their jaws freely, and we sort of get this pullback, really tense sounding, and of course the tongue is then pulling back as well. Tongue tension. I feel like tongues aren't talked about enough by us as vocal teachers, as we are as teaching our choirs how to sing. If you think about the tongue being the thing that really can affect the vowel the most, and the jaw can really sit in a quite similar position. Ah, e, o, oo. Yes, the lips come more forward for o, oo, but the tongue position is what affects the vowel the most. It's going to be a small movement between them, but it's great if we can find that in a lovely free and forward way. So in the olden days, when I was at music college, I was originally taught to flatten the tongue to create a more open sound. And I think that's what a lot of people were taught. So your tongue kind of might sit at the front with the tip of the tongue on the back of the bottom teeth, but the tongue sitting flat. Nowadays we know that actually to make the most of our resonance, it's the space behind the tongue that we want to optimize. So we're actually wanting to bring the tongue a little bit more forward and out of the way rather than back and out of the way. So by that I mean we're going to keep the tongue, the front of the tongue, pretty much forward, pretty much on the back of the bottom teeth for most vowels. It may be that you have to fiddle around with that a bit, and that the middle of the tongue is kind of rolling forward this way rather than rolling back down the throat. Okay, now that might feel a bit strange to begin with, but it's a sort of floaty, lifty feeling in this position rather than that dropped feeling. You'll find eventually you can then get this free, relaxed jaw, and still get a nice bright vowel. So instead of we get You can hear the overtones added in that sound, so the brightness without going where we get a bit more tension in the sound. Okay, so see if you can play around with that with the tongue. You can come up with loads of exercises just to help free up the tongue. Isolating the tongue is great. So something like, I'm going to keep the jaw still but do a la la la, la 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 la. So I'm letting the tongue la 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 go up and down from the back of the top teeth to the bottom teeth, but I'm not chomping with my jaw, la 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 la. So I've made the tongue independent. Hopefully that's going to help it to free up. You could do things where you hang your tongue out, or all the while just observing whether something else like your jaw has extra tension that you don't need. Unnecessary tension creeping into my jaw there. So isolating where we're doing things. We may come onto this a bit more. There may be questions about this area, but the next huge topic is airflow, what we might call support, which is one of those things that I'm always wary about using that term because it's not always interpreted in the same way. And I've actually added here without driving the air, sort of caveat really, because I find most of the time, most amateur choirs don't allow enough breath flow. So there's a sort of holding back of air. And as soon as I get them to allow air just to flow consistently, the sound improves. I think they think that the air is coming out, but actually there is some gripping and holding that's often related to tension in the tongue and gripping here. It's like you're squeezing out the breath rather than just allowing the freedom. So lots of lovely exercises we can do to help our airflow. You'll know about lots of these, but things like semi-occluded vocal tract exercises, and using fricatives, All those sounds are great because you can't make them well without the breath being consistent, especially things like that they will stop working if there's not enough breath. Equally, we don't want it to go and sort of push. So it's the amount you need to make it happen without it being too much. I have to say I wouldn't very often talk like that with an amateur choir, saying don't give too much, because 90% of them probably won't be allowing enough freedom of air. But if you get a sort of sound like a woofy sound, that's where you know there's that driving of air, and we need to just actually not push the breath so much. What else can we do? So I often use physical gesture. You've seen me already move my arms around to demonstrate this, but lots of things that relate to our conducting technique that we can use as part of warm-ups or the way we demonstrate things. So for example, I would often get, if we're doing stuff that goes up high with the range, I'd very often get either something like this or like this, moving an arm or something to represent the flow of air. So to keep encouraging my singers to let breath move and travel without getting stuck. I've put a sense of freedom and release, so just keeping everything moving, getting your tummies. We probably ought to go a little bit into more depth about breathing and support, so that there's always constant movement in your lower abdominal muscles. So we might think, how do we teach our singers to sing with good abdominal breathing, rather than any of this sort of tension creeping up into the shoulders? We want this low breath because it keeps everything nice and relaxed here. It means we're more efficient with what we're doing, more relaxed. So, and basically, you're going to be able to sing for longer. The stamina is going to be so much more increased if, instead of tightening here and squeezing out breath, you're allowing airflow and keeping relaxed around here. So I'll often start with just helping my singers to find the muscles they're going to need to do this. So I'll get them to put their thumbs in their tummy button like that and feel the area below the tummy button here like this. Yeah, I'm going to show you like that. There we go. And often I will start by actually saying, please, when we do this, don't let your upper body collapse forward. Okay, because the first thing that happens when people start drawing their tummy muscles in more as they breathe out is that they start doing this. So if you can keep reminding that the upper body is stable, then you've got some resistance for the tummy to move against, if you've got that stable back. Sometimes I'll say something like, can you, before we do anything else, draw in your lower tummy muscles? So as if you've got like tight trousers on, so you're pulling in your tummy under your tummy button, really drawing that in as much as you can without tightening anything up here. And often it's good to think about it being lower than your tummy button, even though the muscles above your tummy button are kind of related and will get active as well. But if you try just squeezing your muscles in this area, you find straight away there's tension creeping in here. Well, I do. So encouraging that lower feeling below your tummy button is quite helpful for that. So you're squeezing in those tummy muscles, and at the same time, I'm going to ask my choir to allow any excess air that's inside to go, blow out, keeping my upper body stable. And then you've created a vacuum. All that can happen if you undo your tummy is the air can come in. Okay, so your tummy muscles undo, and so you're not doing a breath, but you're you're letting your muscles undo and breath comes in, hopefully. And then you can add in a breath out, squeezing your lower abdominals in towards your back and undoing, and breath comes in. Then I start adding quite a nice sound, encouraging your choirs to have consistency of that sound, so it's not loud to start with and having a diminuendo, but a nice solid a little bit as if they're telling you off rather than a woolly sort of sound. So quite a lot of strength in that, and then they'll get a little bit more activation, a bit more strength in those low abdominal muscles drawing in. And then you can go into some of those things I mentioned about and what we're trying to get is that there's some flexibility of your tummy muscles. So I don't know whether you'll be able to see this, but so everything can bounce back and move in and out easily. We want there to be a kind of dynamic movement. It's not gripped, it's drawing in gradually and freely, but it is really very much engaged down there. So that idea of telling you off without tensing up here can be quite good to have that, get that bit of extra strength in those low abdominal muscles. Again, if there's time, we might come back to a bit more of this because there's so much we could go into on this side of things. I've put about stamina, and this airflow and support is really the engagement of those low abdominal muscles to allow the breath to be consistent so that it's the same kind of flow of air through the whole phrase. So that's what I would think of as support. Those muscles are doing the work to make that airflow consistent, not sort of juddering. I should mention one more thing, which occasionally I've done. If you've got a smaller choir, you could bring a set of straws along, because it's a really lovely thing to be able to blow bubbles and see physically whether those bubbles are consistent as you blow bubbles into your water. Are the bubbles big sometimes and disappearing sometimes? And do they disappear when you start making pitch, going from to? So is there a difference? Ideally, we can go between voiced and unvoiced when we blow bubbles. It's exactly the same as but you can see what's happening with those bubbles. So this stamina idea, airflow helping your stamina, your alignment, your muscles low down, the way you hold yourself up, the good tension of holding up, but not the tension that's unnecessary. And we'll talk a bit more about how we can help our singers with stamina later. Finally, it's worth mentioning registers. Sometimes you might refer to head voice and chest voice, or M1 and M2, or low voice and high voice, something like that. And you've often heard, particularly your altos, kind of taking their low voice up into their high register and getting into difficulty. Oh, I'm stuck. Okay, so and that's potentially going to be tiring on the voice if they're singing in that way higher up. So helping them to find the appropriate register to sing in without being under supported or under colourful in the sound. So finding some high voice might be useful, some different colours in the sound that are lighter to access higher range, sometimes just some wow sounds up in the higher register can be useful to find that and then bring it down. Wow! Ooh! And ooh vowel is a useful one for that. It's harder to kind of welly it in the upper range on an ooh sound. I'm going to move on to some conducting technique things now. I wonder whether it's worth just throwing out any questions about the vocal technique at this stage, actually, Elizabeth, because we're going to take a bit of a gear shift.
Absolutely, that fits with me. If people Is it first potentially for people to unmute if they have questions rather than typing? Are you happy with that, Jo?
Yeah, if there is anything, it'd be lovely. Is there anything in the chat already about
What's in the chat so far has been people letting us know about their kind of experience, but please do feel free to unmute if you've got any questions at this stage rather than having to type it. Or if you'd rather type it, please do that, and I can let Jo know.
Thank you. I can see it now as well. So I'll just give you a moment to think or type, but absolutely no pressure to come up with questions. Or if there's anything you'd like me to just expand on at this stage, please do say. I hope that's been clear-ish so far on the vocal technique side of things and the looking after yourself kind of things. Great, thank you. No questions yet, says Jo. Thank you. Right, we might.
I think we can keep on going, and if anything else comes through, Jo, then I'll mention it and I can save it for later. Or if it's a clarification that we need before we move on, I can just interrupt.
Sure. Right. I'm gonna. Oh, if there's a clicking in the jaw upon opening, is that worth checking out with a GP? It might be. It might be. Sometimes I find, again, if I'm opening in that sort of that way rather than that way. See, I get a click when I open from that there, but if I'm a little narrower and slightly further forward with my chin, without, you don't want to be pushing your chin forward, but just that, I'll go on sideways again. Or that pull back. You might find just by readjusting slightly that actually it helps. Now, the other thing to think about is actually seeing the dentist about a clicky jaw. It's more likely that there's something they could help you with. They might find there's some teeth grinding, so you're tensing at night. And one of the most common things for that would be to have a mouth guard overnight, so you're not able to squeeze here so tightly. So I think that's a pretty common one, and that's probably the most likely cause of it. But thinking about just an awareness of the way you structure your speech, thinking a little bit more narrow rather than bringing your jaw back, and always think about that alignment. They may help and affect that. But yeah, definitely next time you go to the dentist, mention it. Nice question. Okay, I'm going to read this question out. As a teacher, I have days when I teach 4 choirs ranging from primary to secondary and a community choir in the evening, plus classroom letters and musical theatre rehearsals. Finding jumping between using my voice in all these different ways can result in my throat feeling sore and strained by the end. I'm not surprised. The only suggestion is how to manage this. Using a mic isn't an option when I'm moving between different schools all the time. Oh my goodness. I mean, that's a lot of using your voice, and as you say, it's sort of mentally challenging as well to flip between them. Yeah, I think anyone would find that tiring when you're using your voice for that many hours in the day. And anything you can do when you're not using your voice, so shut yourself away in the lunch break if you've got one and don't talk to anyone. Have a hot drink and a real rest, because that is just a lot of stamina. When I first started teaching singing, I was doing 7 hours on the trot, and I don't think I could do it now. You know, it is just really hard, and if you're projecting to your groups, there are what I use in terms of a microphone is something that the choir provides for me, but it's a little amplifier that just I put on my jeans belt, and so it projects, and I have a Madonna kind of mic that connects to it. So you could take something like that around with you. It doesn't have to go into a system, but it would just help a little bit to stop you having to project so much in those sessions. But your own healthy singing and awareness all the time, minimal talking. I find that worse than singing, because you're less likely to engage your muscles as well when you're talking for long periods. So well done, even just getting through those sorts of long days. That is a lot of stamina. Thank you, that's a great question. Okay, let's go for some conducting side of things. I hope everyone can, if I share screen, can still see me. Perhaps I might maybe we do some conducting first, and then I can show you my slides. It might be more fun and just see me a little bit more. So the first most obvious thing, keep going with your brilliant alignment, and everything you demonstrate will be reflected, and your good alignment will help what you're doing with your arms. Think about the fact that where your hands are can kind of center people towards the muscles they should be using to help their singing. So if we're conducting very high all the time, it kind of doesn't help us kind of connect in with our abdominal muscles. Now, that is partly that we might create tension in the shoulders, and it's perfectly possible to conduct up here if you're absolutely in the position where there's no other way of doing it and you just have 3 million people and they can't see you. Keeping your shoulders low and doing that. But if you can conduct, I will stand just for a sec and bring everything a little bit further down so it's always in this area and connected to here. That can be really helpful to kind of center attention into that area and help that to be the focus. And it also stops us starting to creep up in tension here, and that will affect our singer's tension around here. I like to think of airflow linking into what my movement from here is doing. So I sometimes think maybe my wrist is to do with articulation, and the flow of air or phrase comes from the swing of my arm. So the most obvious thing I see in conducting students is that there's even a little bit of holding there, and then immediately the air doesn't look like it's flowing so well, and it makes you feel like there's tension here. Sometimes when I'm teaching conducting, I'll make my student hold a wine bottle to give them the weight of the arm. I actually just spotted I've got a large candlestick. Hang on, this is ridiculous, but here you go. I'm going to hold it like this, and the heaviness of it is going to just encourage that shoulder. You can do it with your other hand to drop down. So I'm not just creating that little extra tension across the top of my shoulder, which can really affect the sound my singers make. It can be quite tiring, so little bits of that just to help the shoulders drop. You can do exercises where you just feel like the weight of the arm going, changing direction. Actually, I'm going to stand and do that as well. So, whee! And we're not rising up to do that, but keeping the shoulder as low as possible. And then it could easily become a figure of 8, where we just throw the arm around and keeping my shoulder right down. So it can be nice warm-up exercise for you as a conductor. You can see immediately when I creep tension into there how that affects my airflow, or the airflow of those people that are singing for me. When we're conducting, those awareness is about the jaw tension. So often I see conductors gripping the jaw or mouth like that, and actually just having a little bit of ease here. When we breathe for our singers, we don't need to do gasping stuff, and actually that can hold the breath. So just a relaxation of the jaw as we breathe, and it's related to the undoing of our abdominal muscles as we take the breath for our singers, and an imagination of the arm kind of releasing. So perhaps when we're conducting a phrase, we could think of some resistance in the air, just a little bit of, depending on how loud or kind of strong it is, that we have a little bit of resistance. But when we breathe, for our singers to sing, that there's airiness from the shoulder. So there's a release here. So the weight of the arm releases, and then we go back to a little bit of engagement in the arm. I also try and think about my own abdominal muscles, my support, if you want to call it that, when I'm conducting. So you can relate that. So you've breathed your phrase, and then just so your own tummy can release when you breathe for your phrase, and then engage again for the phrase very gently. Or perhaps I might engage a little bit if there's something I'm phrasing towards. I was working with someone today on Locusis Day, and I found when I was demonstrating Ade or factus est, to get the and to phrase towards that, my tummy muscles were just naturally engaging. So Ade or factus est. So it's just a little bit of engagement there. So our own support muscles can be useful to help our singers to be using them in a similar way. It's amazing what this mirroring does, isn't it? It's maybe worth thinking about consonants, actually, while we mention things like factus est, that the flow of those consonants with breath. So whether it's unvoiced, like that the air is really coming out, whether it's voiced, where you sing a pitch on it, da 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 da. But I often find that people, especially those unvoiced ones like t, p, k, that people tend to do them a bit by tightening up the throat. Again, we want to get rid of that tension to help our vocal health. So t, p, k, have air traveling behind your consonants. Sorry, just a little interjection while I thought about that. But all these things help the airflow, help relax what we're doing with our singing. So we've got the same sense of freedom and release with our conducting as we do when we're thinking about our vocal technique. Is it helpful maybe just to do some just simple 4 patterns and see if we can maybe breathe with our singers? So if we're going to start with an upbeat, we might float our arm out and breathe in, and then just allow the air to flow from here. If it's just a nice easy phrase of music where we're hoping the breath will flow. Now, it isn't always just going to be a nice legato phrase like this, and we might have a more bouncy style, but we have space in between the beats, and it's still bouncing from my shoulder. Sometimes we might be using our wrist more for something faster like this, but I've still got buoyancy in my upper arm, so it's like a piston, but I'm using my wrist more. But we don't stop that upper arm from being a piston. This is me without any upper arm in a fast pattern with more wrist, and then with the upper arm just allows, you can see the sense of airiness and flow rather than gripping, and how that might affect what your singers are producing. Thinking about us as conductors and how we plan our rehearsals. If you've got particular pieces that have high, loud sections, obviously you need to be thinking about how we plan our rehearsals, not to be doing that all the time. Sometimes we've just ended up in a situation where we have to teach a loud and high piece that's going to take most of the rehearsal. And so thinking about techniques of how we can protect our singers the best we can. Can we sing some phrases down an octave? Can we speak the words in a tricky rhythmic passage? Remember that when you're speaking the text, it's great if we can use our sing-song voices, not sitting down in our low voices to do the rhythm. So those sorts of things are really useful to plan out in your rehearsal, how you can save the voices. Is it by just having a moment to relax and dissipate the energy before going again? Just think, actually, let's have a moment of drinking water before we go again. Is it just do 2 parts at a time on this to give other voices a rest? Often, it's likely to be your sopranos and tenors that have all that more high stuff. So yeah, I definitely would advocate for note learning down an octave and that sort of thing. If any of you've got ideas or suggestions for that, do throw them in into the chat, because I'm sure other people have got ideas of rehearsal management for those sorts of things. I'm going to get my screen share back up and just whiz you down to So those are all the things we've just covered about conducting techniques. So we'll send this out so you've got it just for reference. And final few thoughts really before we go into any questions. How can I help as a conductor? Don't be afraid to talk to your singers about how to look after their voices. We're definitely going to add in here about warming up and cooling down. So sometimes conductors talk to me about, I don't really do much of a warm-up. People turn up late if I do a warm-up and they're not that interested. But actually, really do encourage your singers to be there for that warm-up. Doing something a little bit physical, getting their bodies moving, and then doing things to get their breath moving and everything relaxing. It's just going to mean they sing with safer technique through the whole rehearsal. But also it's your opportunity to work on vocal technique, and I'll always relate something in the warm-up to what I'm doing in the rehearsal. For example, I've been doing some Bach with lots of runs this week, so making sure I did plenty of work on coloratura with my choir. Lots of giggling, lots of ha 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 hey stuff, and having fun, but also again kind of and sparkling and hand movement and things like that, getting some articulation and flow through some fast runs. So planning your warm-ups and making sure there's a decent amount of time for it, and if possible, a little bit of cool down. What do I mean by that? It's basically reversing your warm-up. So you could do some things like all those sounds we talked about at the beginning with the brr, r, j, those are great for helping our voices to kind of you basically stretch the vocal cords, and you want to just help everything relax back down. You could do a little bit of very gentle vocal fry as well as part of that. It's not too long, and not everyone will be able to do it, so just make sure it's just really easy, really gentle. So there's some ideas for cooling down. I've put here, be open to singers changing voice part as needed, and maybe hear people again or help them with that. You're looking for range, for colour. Where does the voice sound at its best? Where does it sound comfortable? Where might it sound strained? And just because we might need more tenors doesn't mean it's necessarily the best thing to crowbar our baritones into the tenor part. So being careful with our singers' voices is really important. Put here, this is a big picture thing. Allow your singers to sing freely in their own voice rather than imitating a certain sound. So being true to themselves and their own instrument. So perhaps, for example, if you are trying to make adults kind of restrict their voice, rein their voices in to sound childlike, you may find that they're under supporting the sound from their abdominal muscles, maybe tightening up into here. Now, vibrato might come into that question as well. If people are singing very well and freely, some vibrato will likely come into the voices. So just be careful about attitudes towards not allowing vibrato in the sound. There's difference between vibrato and a warble or a tremor. Sometimes the tremor could be some issue with the voice, but a free vibrato is absolutely natural if everything is working well. So if you're asking people to not sing with vibrato, you may well be having to do something to constrict what they're doing, either make it sound breathier, or kind of tightening, to inhibit it being so free. Obviously, loads of thought going into repertoire choice, which we all do all the time, but think about what will suit our singers' technical ability, maybe stretching them a little bit, but obviously with younger voices, by which I mean anyway, anyone sort of university age and downwards, that the vocal apparatus is still growing and strengthening, and even though you might have university age singers, their voices are still not as strong as older people, and so lots of very loud high singing might not be the best thing for those singers. Certainly for younger people, those under 10, that sort of age, are going to have limited range in the low part of their voice, so not sitting too much below middle C, really. I would say for your youngest singers, keep it in their middle and upper range. Again, not too high, but not overusing the lowest range would be healthier. And finally, in here, I put using games to have fun with your voice, because actually the more fun we have and the less kind of anxious we become about it, the freer we're most likely to be. So as you've seen, I do lots of physical things, but also things using character may be useful. Can you add 10% more excitement in that sound, or playing kind of games around the voice? I often start with some things like hey, 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 or wow, hey, you. So using your voice in kind of natural primal ways that you would do with without thinking. So it's a more natural, joyful way of singing. So keep the joy. Don't what we say as conductors can so affect what happens to people's voices. Anything making people feel scared, stressed, uncomfortable. I mean, frankly, anyone that's here on an ABCD session trying to improve what they're doing is going to have a positive attitude to the way they work with singers. But we all know of conductors that have made people feel worried and anxious, and whilst we want to strive for excellence and get the best out of people, just thinking about the way we always have to nag ourselves, and one often finds you look back at rehearsal and I could have, or maybe I was patronising about this, or beating yourself up over it. But as long as there's some real positivity and joy about the music making, I think people will feel they want to allow their voices out, allow yourselves to be free and happy with their voices. Feel like that could be where we stop for questions on a very positive note. Let me see if I can stop sharing at that point. There we go. So we've covered a bit on how we look after ourselves, what to do if there's an issue, how to sing freely and without added tension that we don't need, to sing for longer with more stamina by allowing that air and that the muscles to do more work for us down here rather than round here, and about how we as conductors can affect what our singers do. So we can either finish there, but we'll certainly have a moment of question time if anyone would like to, or just anything you think is useful out of that or wasn't clear that you'd like me to go into in a little bit more detail, something, just reflections perhaps about something that might be new to you in what we've talked about today. It'd be lovely to just hear any thoughts anyone might have. Give you a moment.